Part 1. White Willet. The blade pressed in deep, scraping against quivering white fur.
"You will tell me all that you know about the Blood Brothers and the location of their treasure hoard, old rat,"
Captain Bartholomew snarled. The pirate captain loomed over his captive with a double-edged blade where his right paw should be, as his crew tore the humble cottage apart. A bottle smashed against the ground, and his accompanying pirate crew laughed as they shoved freshly stained parchments away. "I know what is known by all," White Willet stammered. He tried to back away, but a sturdy thug held him in place, paws digging into his white fur. The old stories had been told from tavern to tavern until they had gained a life of their own. Tales of the 3 notorious pirate brothers who had ravaged merchant traffic while leaving nary a survivor behind. Brutish and skilled with both cutlass and flintlock, they had gained a fearsome reputation and a treasure. Yet that had been their undoing. Ultimately, their ferocity made them turn on each other, fighting over their legendary hoard in a whirlwind of blood and fur. The legends, the myths.
"Do not toy with me. You may be withered and your eyesight gone, but your mind remains quite keen,"
Bartholomew sneered, pushing the blade closer.
"Do not let your last words be mere lies."
Unnoticed, a pair of eyes peered out from a barrel. A small mouse watched fearfully as a lantern smashed onto the cottage floor, casting an eerie glow around the proceedings. Not far off, a pirate was slicing through a sack of grain with a scimitar, while another had smashed a chest and greedily picked through the contents. The old albino rat gulped.
"The Blood Brothers were 3 siblings, villainous vermin that terrorized land and sea, plundering treasure from merchant holds and native riches." "Enough of the history, listen,"
Bartholomew snapped.
"Tell me of their treasure."
"Ah, yes, the treasure of 1,000 kings, a cursed treasure that caused the blood of brothers to thin and boil with rage, a rage that turned brother against brother against brother."
"Do not speak to me of curses. Tell me the location of the Blood Brothers' treasure hoard, and this blade upon your neck."
The pirate thug gripped White Willet tight as the old rat struggled away.
"Will sink no further."
Captain Bartholomew leaned in close, breath hot on the albino fur.
"Where is Blood Island?"
he asked, his voice unnaturally calm. The blind rat sunk down a moment later, unable to break free. "Beneath a shroud. A cat growls."
"A cat?"
The thug behind him repeated in disbelief. In a flash, Bartholomew's blade whipped up until it was just a hair's breadth away from the pirate's throat. The rat's eyes widened in terror.
"Quiet, you fool!"
The old albino rat's eyes flickered as he slumped, settling onto his wooden stool. In a weak voice he continued a moment later. "The brothers 3, a cat of 9. The ripped sack of grain fell to the ground. The pirate, who had been rummaging through it for hidden treasures, now rooted in place. Behind the pirate, the mouse ducked down low and quivered in fear as his heart beat a rapid drumbeat. "9 cats," the pirate said. "We'll never—"
"Silence!"
Bartholomew roared, now turning on this pirate with a blade in hand.
"Or you will share the same fate as the albino."
From within the barrel, The mouse called Pipsqueak heard nothing but ominous silence. Taking a moment to still his breathing, he tentatively raised his head a fraction and peered out once again. The pirate captain had turned away now, and the attention of the other pirates was fixed on him as his blade scraped against White Willet's throat. He leaned in close.
"Tell me of the 9, old one."
When the albino rat spoke, his words were the barest whisper.
"A cat and 9 tails watches over the blood treasure hoard, hidden under a shroud of mist. The cat has begun to growl, begun to rumble."
Bartholomew grinned slyly. The orange glow of the fallen lantern gleamed in his eyes.
"Of course, the shrouded sea."
In an instant, Bartholomew shot up and motioned to the other pirates in the cottage. He pointed toward the open door with his blade arm.
"Return to the Scarred Serpent and prepare to set sail for the shrouded sea."
One of the pirates began scurrying for the doorway, but a few hesitated. Finally, one summoned up the courage for a response.
"But, Captain, the shrouded sea swallows ships."
With a roar, Bartholomew swung his blade toward the recalcitrant pirate, who barely managed to duck out of the way and retain his head.
"Do as I say now."
As Bartholomew's crew rats hastily scurried out of the cottage, Bartholomew turned his attention to White Willet, who could barely stay seated on the stool. Bartholomew grinned as he ran a dirty nail along the sharpened edge of his blade.
"As for you, old one,"
hidden behind the barrel, Pipsqueak quivered in fear, glancing over the barrel's rim as his paws held on tight. Unbidden, a quiet squeak began to drift out of his mouth before he let go. The last thing he saw was Bartholomew slitting the throat of old White Willet, and then Pip dropped down, cowering down in the shadows behind the barrel. He squeezed his eyes tight, paws covering his mouth as his tail wrapped around himself for comfort. Bartholomew stepped back, wiping away the blood from his bladed appendage. His head tilted slightly, ears perking up under the brim of his tricorn hat. His eyes shifted to one side. He could have sworn he'd heard something as he plunged the blade into the albino. After a moment, he shrugged. It was no matter. Perhaps a peculiar death rattle from the pathetic old rat. He turned, then paused momentarily at the open doorway of White Willet's cottage. In the distance, the lights of the port city flickered away, illuminating the darkness. The pirate captain breathed in the night air as light from the full moon shone through the window panes and open doorway, casting a long shadow stretching along the cottage's plank floor. He raised his arm blade, which gleamed in the moonlight.
"Rest in peace, old blind one."
Captain Blacktail slashed his cutlass forward with his right paw, parrying away the sword blows from a pair of advancing pirates, rage filling their eyes. He simply grinned in return, hopping backward onto the table and taking a large swig from the mug of ale in his left paw. It was an impressive jump, even without accounting for his peg leg. Ale spilled as he kept the pair at bay, glancing up as his first mate dangled from the balcony.
"Captain! Oh, Captain!"
His first mate, Peeve, was narrowly avoiding the blows of several pirates on the balcony, who were trying their best to hit him with cudgels and broken bottles. His favoured bullwhip was still in his belt, and it was all he could do to dodge their attacks. A bottle whirled past as he cast a fearful glance down at his captain.
"That's the spirit, Peeve. Show these scallywags that the crew of the Vile Vermin is a force to be reckoned with,"
Captain Blacktail replied, blocking another wild slash. Above him, one of Peeve's paws fell loose of the railings, and he swung in place, holding on with one paw and sucking in a deep breath.
"Right, Captain, I'll do just that."
Captain Blacktail grunted, knocking away a sword from one of his attackers and slamming his peg leg in the face of another.
"Ah, now you've gone and made me spill me ale."
As the dazed pirates fell back, Blacktail paused to take a long swallow of his remaining ale and take in the chaos around him. The Cask and Cutlass Tavern was a regular stopping point for Blacktail and his crew. Truthfully, he loved the chaos. It was a large, notorious drinking establishment that catered to the many pirates, buccaneers, sailors and rogues that ventured into the port town of Tempest. Behind the bar were huge ale-filled casks and a balcony that circled along the walls above the first floor. Perhaps a half-dozen pirates were fighting in swirling melee around the stairs. Just across from Blacktail were 20 or so round wooden tables, like the one he stood on, though about half were already toppled over. The ground was littered with stools, benches, broken glass and wounded rats. Blacktail chuckled as he took in the carnage around him. The Cask and Cutlass had seen more than its fair share of squabbling, but this was indeed a barroom brawl of legend, a fight that would live on in memory and lore. A pirate shrieked as he toppled from the balcony, narrowly missing Blacktail. A few paces behind him were two swashbucklers locked in a deadly, whirling sword fight, which ended abruptly as another pirate slammed a stool on the unsuspecting head of one of the rats. Yet even over the chaos, the cracking of wooden railing drew Captain Blacktail's attention back upward. Peeve jerked his head back from a cudgel that smashed into the railing, and he swayed in place, still somehow hanging on.
"Quit hanging about, Peeve, and get your tail down here."
Peeve grimaced, rolling his eyes and muttering, "Aye, aye, Captain." Under his breath, he reached down and snapped up the bullwhip, unfurling it and scanning the tavern with a determined gaze. As the attackers closed in, he cracked his bullwhip through the air, curling it around the chandelier. The bullwhip wrapped around the iron spoke of the chandelier, extinguishing a candle, and he soared through the air just as the railing splintered away. He flew through the air for a dizzying moment, legs flailing wildly, taking in the chaotic scene below. A couple of pirates dragged another pirate along the top of the bar, smashing him into mugs and bottles. All around the bar were pirates, breaking bottles and jugs over the heads of other pirates, snarling and shouting as glass shards flew. Several blasts of flintlock pistols echoed through the tavern, smashing into windows or slamming into walls. Unheeded, a small fire licked at the corner of an upturned bench as a pair of pirates slashed at each other with drawn knives. Several pirates roared together, heaving an unfortunate victim out of a window, cheering as the glass shattered. Peeve twisted and soared backward, his tail nearly snatched by another pirate. He snarled down at the pirate who tried to grab him, just as another grabbed him from behind in a headlock, tussling with the pirate before slamming him into a table. Peeve flew past toward where Captain Blacktail was taking on another group of attackers, Cutlass whirling through the air and cutting through whiskers and fur alike.
"I must say, I remember this establishment being much more hospitable the last time we were in port," Captain Blacktail called out.
Hard-pressed as he was, his quick footwork and masterful swordplay sent another handful reeling back in agony just as Peeve landed beside him.
"Ah, Peeve,"
Blacktail said, fending off the pirates swarming around the table.
"Permission to come aboard, Captain."
Blacktail grunted in approval as his cutlass slashed through a three-brimmed hat. The pair stood back to back, holding their ground, Peeve drawing his cutlass and slashing away.
"Drink up, my hearty,"
Blacktail said as he handed his mug over.
"We've overextended our welcome."
A quick blow sent the nearest pirate reeling back, and Peeve paused to drink from the mug. He grimaced, tilting it, realizing it was already empty. Instead, he flung it forward, a pirate squawking as it smashed into his snout.
"Once again, Captain,"
Peeve replied. Another attacker leapt toward Captain Blacktail, but the captain caught him in mid-air, flinging him away toward a pair of angry pirates. The pair stood on the table as if it were afloat amid a sea of angry pirates, all seemingly sharing the same goal, to spill the blood of Captain Blacktail. The attackers had only grown in number, swarming closer, armed with daggers, cutlasses and cudgels. Blacktail ducked aside as a bottle whirled past.
"The clientele has definitely sailed south, Peeve." "Agreed, Captain."
Peeve gritted his teeth as a heavy blade thudded down on the table, narrowly missing his tail.
"It was a pleasure sailing with you, Captain."
The horde of rats swarmed ever closer, pushing the table along with them. Unable to cut them down, a few had grabbed the table itself, and more joined them, charging forward as the table was carried along like a ship in the night. With a resounding crash, they slammed into a large window. Captain Blacktail and Peeve flung outward to land heavily in the alley outside. Blacktail's hat flew through the air, landing on the cobblestones and rolling toward a pair of heavy-lidded loiterers slunk down in the archway beside the entrance with a jug of rot-gut open between them. Captain Blacktail grumbled, slowly rising from the puddle he'd fallen into in the middle of a cobblestone street. Grimacing, he shook his dirty paws together.
"Peeve!"
he shouted.
"Aye, Captain,"
Peeve replied, rising from a heap of trash. He sniffed, looking more than a little worse for wear, and took an unsteady seat on the curb. Captain Blacktail rose and approached the pair of loiterers, who blinked at him in surprise, and he snatched his hat up.
"I trust that amidst that maelstrom within the tavern, you still managed to retrieve the information we be seeking,"
Captain Blacktail said, brushing dirt off his hat and reshaping it.
"Aye, Captain." "Blacktail!"
a voice roared. Peeve winced, but the roar didn't come from those inside the tavern. Instead, it came from a solidly built rat grasping a scroll and approaching at a trot, with 4 deputies just behind him. It was the chief constable, and he looked none too pleased.
"That be Captain Blacktail, you scurvy."
He fell silent as swords were drawn, the deputies brandishing gleaming rapiers while the chief constable held his scroll aloft in the lantern light.
"Actually, according to this very mandate, the correct designation is—"
The chief constable lowered the scroll and glared at Captain Blacktail.
"Prisoner Blacktail."
Captain Blacktail gave a quizzical look at his first mate.
"Peeve, we be wanted here in Tempest?"
Peeve shrugged.
"Apparently, Captain." "Exactly what be the charges, Constable?"
Captain Blacktail asked, raising his voice over the continuing clamour within the tavern. The melee had evidently still not settled down. The chief constable sneered, handing the scroll to the deputy at his side.
"I am quite sure you are well aware of the crimes you have committed against the township of Tempest, But I assure you that the magistrate will refresh your memory before you."
The chief constable smirked at the pair of pirates.
"I believe your type refers to it as Dance the Empen Jig. They be planning to hang you, Captain,"
Peeve explained. Blacktail rolled his eyes. "Us, Peeve?
"Captain,
I doubt I'll be dancing alone, matey." Realization shone in Peeve's eyes, and he solemnly nodded.
"Aye, Captain."
As the deputies approached, glass shattered once again, drawing their attention upward. A chair sailed through the broken window, but it was soon followed by a yelping pirate who fell into the cobblestone street below. The doors burst open, almost at the exact second, a pirate rushing away as a flintlock musket let loose. The jug of rotgut exploded between the two loiterers, who scampered away just in time to avoid a rolling herd of tussling pirates as the barroom brawl spilled out into the street. A bottle shattered in the street as another pirate crashed to the ground from a second-story window, his wail adding to the chaotic medley of breaking glass, shouting and occasional blasts of musketry. "Ah!" a pirate shouted, gripping onto the back of another as he stumbled away, bumping into one of the startled deputies. "Ah!" The second one snapped back as they crashed into the deputy and resumed wrestling in the street. The chief constable backed away in astonishment as one of his deputies joined in, hauling the pirates off their comrade. "Ah, constable, do give the magistrate my best, but me mate and I must be off."
"Aye, Captain,"
Peeve replied, and stumbled forward as Captain Blacktail shoved him into motion. With a dozen whirling melees breaking out all round them, the two rats scampered away, weaving past knives and claws. "Smartly there, mate," Blacktail called out, ducking under a broken bottle brandished as a weapon. They picked up speed, soon leaving the tavern brawl behind. "The constable will surely be on our tail shortly." Yet a quick glance behind them showed that the chief constable and his deputies were practically swallowed up by the battling mob flowing out of the cask and cutlass. The chief constable tried his best to gain control over the chaotic situation, but his shouts fell on deaf ears. "Stand down," he roared over the carnage. "Stand down." Blacktail took a quick right turn down a side street, hauling Peeve along with him, Blacktail's peg leg clattering on the cobblestones with each step.
"You were saying, Peeve?"
"Aye, Captain. We are looking for an old albino known as the White Willet."
"Mr. Willet,"
Pip murmured, tears welling as he held the old rat's head up. The albino struggled for breath on the hard floor of his cottage, coughing, head cradled by Pip's paws. Pip leaned in close to hear White Willet's weakened voice as the old rat clutched his paw with what little strength he had left.
"Pip,"
he said, pausing to cough.
"Oh, Master Willet, what have they done to you?"
"Pip, you must listen to me," the blind rat said, straining to convey his message with what time was left to him. He clutched at Pip as the mouse rose.
"I will go and retrieve Miss Crumpet. She will know—"
"Pip, stay. I have to tell you." He paused, coughing again. Beside him, Pipsqueak hesitated, torn between listening to the old rat and summoning help.
"No, Miss Crumpet, I should get help."
White Willet struggled to get his words out. His head rose, his words more forceful now. "Time is short, Pip. You must listen to me." Pip rushed back to White Willet's side and offered support for the dying old rat as he broke into another coughing fit.
"Sir!"
"The cat and 9 tails," White Willet murmured, once again clutching Pip's paw.
"I don't care about your legends. I need to find help."
Pip replied, doing his best to hold White Willet's head up and hoping the old albino rat would pull through.
No, there's no time, lad. Please, Mr. Willet.
White Willet's eyes closed as he struggled to speak.
Heed my words,
he said, breaking into coughing.
Only when the cat sleeps does he awaken.
Pip draped himself across White Willet's body, sobbing,
No!
The door creaked open once again, moonlight falling over Pip as two forms were framed by the darkness. His tear-streaked gaze rose in fear to meet the pair, quivering beside White Willet's motionless body.
Squeak!
A menacing figure stepped forward, a peg leg thudding onto the floor.
Well, well, well.
Cutlasses swung on the belts of the two pirates, stepping forward, and Pip felt his end approaching. Uncertainly, Pip realized they weren't part of Bartholomew the Blade's crew. The first rat grasped the hilt of his sheathed cutlass. Beside him, the other pirate glared down at the boy. Despite it all, Pip fought against the fear, hoping that they might have come to save White Willet.
What have we here?
Captain Blacktail murmured, taking in the disarray around the cottage.
Please, sir.
Peeve pushed forward, almost shoving the young mouse to the ground as he stepped over and circled around White Willet's body.
Pipe down, lad. Squeak.
Ignoring the pair, Captain Blacktail strode inward, glancing at White Willet's cluttered desk. It had been thoroughly turned over by Bartholomew the Blade's crew during their ransacking.
Peeve?
He asked, frowning down at the fallen albino. Peeve had been examining White Willet's body, carefully lifting an arm, as if it were a piece of rotting driftwood, and now he shook his head. Pip remained still beside him, horrified by what he was witnessing.
He's given up the ghost, Captain. No, he hasn't.
Peeve flashed a creepy smile as he looked the frightened Pip right in the eye.
Sorry, lad, he be deader than chum.
Captain Blacktail sighed, stepping over the fallen body of White Willet. As he did so, he brushed Pip to the side.
Step aside, lad.
Squeak! Pip replied, darting away as Blacktail's peg leg thudded into where the mouse had been crouching. He backed away, the two pirates content to ignore the young mouse.
Bartholomew Blade?
Blacktail asked.
Aye, Captain,
Peeve replied with a nod.
I suspect none other.
He can't be dead, Pip murmured behind them, tears filling his eyes once again. Captain Blacktail nudged the still body of White Willet with his peg leg.
That be dead, squeaky one.
Captain Blacktail stepped away, once again examining the ransacked cottage. He paused by the desk and lifted a broken hourglass. Sand poured onto the floor as the pirate captain pursed his lips and considered the situation. Peeve circled around the cottage but found little of importance.
What do we do now, Captain? We find Bartholomew before he finds the Blood Brothers' treasure hoard. But,
Peeve grimaced, scratching at his neck,
he's the only one who knows the location of the treasure.
A sudden light shone in his eyes, reflected by his captain. As one, they leaned in towards each other.
Perhaps the lad knows. Aye, aye, Captain. Understood.
They turned simultaneously toward the stunned mouse, displaying matching wicked grins. Pip blinked, nervously wringing his paws, and gulped. The sorrow that filled him was once again overcome by fear. Peeve leaned in close and did his best to look genuine, but he didn't quite pull it off.
Don't worry, lad. Now what be your name?
Pip, sir. Peeve placed one paw upon his own chest and motioned towards Captain Blacktail with his other. The two pirates loomed over the frightened mouse.
Well, Pipsqueak, I be Peeve, first mate aboard the villainous Vermin, and this be your captain, Captain Blacktail.
My what? Captain Blacktail grinned down at Pip as he pulled out a cudgel tucked into his belt. He tapped it against his peg leg twice, the sound of rattling wood menacing in the silence of the cottage. Finally, he broke the quiet. "You're cap'n, lad," he said, raising the cudgel high. He slammed it down in a flash, and the stunned mouse couldn't even let out a peep as everything went dark. The pirate captain chuckled as Pip fell back, Peeve grabbing the mouse before he hit the ground. "You're now a crew member aboard the Vile Vermin."